Can I ask you an uncomfortable question? It's a simple question, but it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to ask it, and it'll be uncomfortable for you, I think, to wrestle with it. A few days ago, I attended a funeral. I drove about 5 hours to there and back to get to this funeral, and it was packed. The place was packed. And honestly, I saw only a few people that I knew, but I knew the woman whose funeral it was. And the place was packed. The parking lot was overflowing. Why? Well, because of her answer to this question. Here's the question. How generous are you really? And as I said, this is uncomfortable for you, but it's uncomfortable for me as well, because the answer is not even close to where I could be. And this woman, she answered that question with her life. You've probably heard this thought, but never do you see a hearse on the way to a funeral with the second hearse behind it carrying the person's belongings. Never do you hear the conversation at a funeral, oh, he had all this amazing stuff. She had all this stuff. How much did he make or she make? Never do we hear that conversation. The conversation's always around the generosity of the person. And how generous are you really? And how generous am I really? A few years ago, I remember looking at a Christmas tree in, I think it was in a church. And you see these all the time at Christmas time. You see Christmas trees in churches and sometimes in libraries or in schools, public places sometimes, and they'll have envelopes on them. This church actually had little angels, little paper angels hanging from it, and they had names of kids, and they had a name and an age and a little description. Annabelle is 6 and she's this size, and maybe it would say something that Annabelle was hoping for Christmas. And I remember looking at that tree one year, and this is going back a few years now, and thinking, well, I could get something for Annabelle. But what if I get Annabelle the same Christmas that my own kids get? And I was doing a class with a group of teenagers at the time, group of 8th graders, and I asked them the question, and I took them to one of these trees, and I said, look at these names. I said, you don't know them, I don't know them, but how generous are we really? I mean, what if we took one of those names and said, I'm going to find a way to give this young person, this child, the Christmas that I get, the Christmas that my nieces and nephews and my grandkids maybe, or my kids, or my neighbors get. How generous are you really? I mean, if you put it on some real perspective, we measure all kinds of stuff in our lives. We measure all kinds of stuff that's important. How much money do you have in the account for your kid's college fund, for example, or what's the mortgage down to now, or right? We measure all kinds of stuff. How much do we have budgeted for that vacation? How much did we spend on the truck or the boat or right? We have all these numbers. But how generous are you really? Put it in a real perspective somehow, some way. Maybe that's the way for you. Line it up next to, I spend this much on Thanksgiving dinner. I spend this much on Christmas Eve or Christmas dinner. I spend this much on my own kids for their birthdays. Compare it in a way that makes it incredibly relevant to you and gives you this reality check, this skit to say, how generous are you really? How generous am I really? What if you decided, just over the next month, to be as generous with somebody maybe you don't know, or as generous with somebody maybe you've really never been generous with. Maybe it's somebody you do know. Maybe it's some kid in your neighborhood. Maybe it's a niece or a nephew or a second cousin's kids, maybe. Someone that, and take them to the game. Send them take them out for dinner. How generous are you really?